The first point we must all realize on the topic of death is that nobody knows with certainty what happens. We are shielded from this reality of death as much as Mario is shielded from the reality of our own existence. How would Mario ever find a way to learn about the existence of Nintendo, his creators, and the existence of man from his limited 2D existence all the way in Mario Land? I think that the place we are at before we were born is the same place as after we die. I remember as a kid contemplating for the first time what it would be like to die. The first time we think of the thought of not existing forever after death was terrifying. As an adult, the thought isn't nearly as scary, but I distinctly remember the fear of death, and I am sure many of us hold as children the thought of ceasing to exist. The more we think of it though, the harder it gets to imagine. To disappear for eternity when eternity has no start or finish, but for it to happen after death should indicate that there was a start, which should null the very meaning of eternity. You will notice that patterns in nature tend to repeat themselves. What we can see in the construction of the tree, we can see in the construction of the lungs, as we see in the construction of the grapes. The river's branching as it flows to the sea mirrors the veins spreading through a leaf, much like the vessels spreading through the body. The patterns in the tree stump closest resemble those in the fingerprint. Nature tends to repeat itself, and this leads us to the realization that all things have emanated from the one or same source, the one creator. For if they were different, or if the source was completely random, then such similarities would be more few and far between. Just think of the moon. Why is the lunar cycle the same length as a woman's menstrual cycle? Consider the phases of human life with the phases of a single day. The beginning of life is dark in the womb, much like the beginning of morning is dark. Then birth is the flash of light, much like the beginning of the sunrise. The morning is fresh, much like the early years of life. The sun rises at this time, as does the energy of the child. As the sun warms towards lunch, the child's energy builds up in the same way. At lunchtime, the sun is beaming, just as the young man is. This is the peak of the day, as is the child's peak of his life. Morning becomes noon. The child becomes a man. Just as the sun peaks in height and temperature, so does the man peak in his source of energy and vitality. After a few hours, or in the man's case, a few decades, the sun begins to descend, as does the man's life energy. The sun sinks lower towards the horizon, as the man's energy sinks lower towards death. Finally, sunset arrives, and the sky becomes golden, just as a man's golden years arrive. The setting of the sun gives a beauty to the sky, much like the winding down of one's life gives perspective to it. As the sky grows cooler, the man too grows colder and weaker. The sun makes its final descent into the night, just as a man makes his final descent into death. The day is now over, as is the man's life. The sun is replaced by the moon, as is life replaced with death. And thus at this time we say good night. That is until the next morning. But what is often overlooked here is this: just as the day is necessary for night to arrive, so is night necessary for day to arrive. That is to say that just as life is needed to bring about death, so is death needed to bring about life. At the end of every day, a new day will always dawn. Thus, at the end of every death, a new life will always form. I think one thing is certain in nature, and that is that nature works in cycles, and a cycle is a circle, and that is, it goes on and on and on. Just as nature has seasons, so does life, but those seasons do not finish, they repeat, as does life. The mind trying to imagine a permanent death is so jarring, perhaps because the thought is unnatural and against nature. Alan Watts once illustrated the nature of life and time using the image of a barber's pole. The spinning pole we often used to see out the front of a barber's shop. At first glance, the spiraling red and white stripes seem to move upward or downward, creating the illusion of progress or movement through time. But in reality, the pole simply spins in place. It just goes round and around and round again. Nothing actually rises or falls. It doesn't go anywhere. This, Watts explains, reflects our experience of life. The constant flow and change we perceive is not a straightforward journey from birth to death, but an ongoing cycle without true beginnings or endings. Like the waves formed when a pebble drops into the water. It appears the water moves outward, but in truth, it only moves up and down. The wave is the illusion, not the water itself. Similarly, our sense of a continuous self moving through time is an illusion. Each moment exists independently, and the person you were yesterday is not the same as the person you are now, or will be tomorrow. Life and death are not separate points on a line, but part of an eternal cycle. Just as the barber's pole's stripes never truly start or end, so too does life flow endlessly, without finality. Imagine your entire life was recorded on a VHS tape, and the particular scene where you are listening to this video is currently being played on the VHS player. How can you be certain that this scene you are currently experiencing isn't on repeat, and it hasn't already been played countless times before? When we play a video game, we often play the same character, starting at the same save point many times over. Perhaps you have already died many times and keep returning to the same checkpoint. Science has a theory called quantum immortality, where each time you face death, your consciousness simply branches off into a version of the universe in where you survive. You never experience your own non-existence. Not because you are immortal in the body, but because awareness itself cannot experience nothingness. Death, then, is like a momentary blackout between channel switches, and consciousness simply tunes in to another station. As Epicurus said, death does not concern us, because as long as we exist, death is not here, and when it does come, we no longer exist. Just as when you awaken from a dream, you realize that you were never the character in the dream, but the dreamer behind it. So too might it be that life is not something happening to you, but through you. The you who was born and the you who will die are roles, masks, what the Hindus called Lila, the divine play. Behind it all, there is the player, the witness, the timeless awareness watching the film flicker on the screen. And so the barber pole keeps spinning, not going anywhere, yet always in motion. Just as time seems to flow, though the present moment never moves. Just as we seem to grow and change, though there is always only now. Perhaps the question is not what happens after I die, but rather, who is it that has been watching this all unfold, all along? Who is it that is watching me?